Forbidden history. The untold story of humanity's beginning. What if everything you thought you knew about the beginning of humanity was incomplete? What if the story we've been told about our origins, the one taught in Sunday schools, debated in universities, and whispered in ancient texts, was just the surface layer of something far more profound and mysterious? Before we proceed, we have a goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers. Help us. Subscribe to our channel and leave a like in this video so we can keep making great videos like this for you. Tonight, we're diving into forbidden territory. We're going to explore questions that challenge the very foundation of human history. Questions that have been avoided, suppressed, or simply overlooked for centuries. Because buried within the pages of the most ancient texts lie clues that suggest humanity's beginning is not what it appears to be. You see, most people assume they know the story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then came Adam, the first human being, formed from dust in a perfect garden. Simple, clean, complete. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if Adam wasn't actually the first human being to walk this earth? What if there were others before him, alongside him, beyond the boundaries of that famous garden? This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory or wild speculation. This is about reading the ancient texts with fresh eyes, studying the original languages, and asking the questions that scholars have been wrestling with for millennia. Questions that might fundamentally change how we understand our place in this universe. Before we go any further, let me be clear about something. This journey we're about to take together will challenge you. It might shake beliefs you've held your entire life. It might force you to reconsider assumptions you never knew you had. But here's what I promise you. By the end of this exploration, you'll have a deeper, richer understanding of the mystery of human existence. You won't just know the story, you'll understand the layers beneath it. So, settle in, open your mind, and prepare to discover the untold story of humanity's beginning. Because what we're about to uncover isn't just ancient history. It's the key to understanding who we really are. Let's start at the very beginning, or what we've been told is the beginning. When most people think about the creation of humanity, they picture a single straightforward narrative. God creates the world in 6 days, forms Adam from the dust of the earth, places him in the Garden of Eden, creates Eve from his rib, and there you have it. The first humans, the parents of all mankind, the beginning of everything. But here's where things get interesting. If you actually sit down and read the opening chapters of Genesis carefully, and I mean really carefully, you'll notice something that most people miss entirely. There isn't just one creation account. There are two. And they're not identical. In fact, they're so different that for centuries, scholars have been trying to figure out how they fit together. Some say they're contradictory. Others claim they're complement. But very few have considered the possibility that they might be describing entirely different events. Let me walk you through what I mean. In Genesis 1, we get this sweeping cosmic view of creation. It's like watching the universe unfold from a satellite camera high above. Day by day, order emerges from chaos. Light separates from darkness. Waters divide. Land appears. Plants sprout. Stars ignite. Animals multiply. And then on the 6th day comes the culmination. The creation of mankind. But notice the language here. The text says God created mankind in his own image. Male and female. He created them. Not a man. Not a woman. Mankind. Humanity as a whole. A collective creation. And this happens after all the animals have been made as the crown of creation. The final masterpiece in God's cosmic gallery. There's something majestic about this account. It's broad, sweeping, universal. It's talking about the entire human species blessed with the divine image, given dominion over all the earth. No specific names. No particular location. Just a grand declaration that humanity, all of humanity, bears the image of God. But then we turn the page and everything changes. Genesis chapter 2 reads like we've zoomed in from that satellite view to a documentary camera on the ground. Suddenly, we're not talking about mankind in general. We're talking about one specific man. The Lord God forms this man from the dust of the earth. He breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. He places him in a garden in Eden in the east. This isn't the cosmic creation of humanity. This is the intimate formation of an individual. And that individual has a name: Adam. Now, here's where most people try to reconcile these accounts by saying that chapter 2 is just a more detailed version of day 6 from chapter 1. Like getting a close-up shot after the wide-angle view. But what if that's not what's happening here? What if these are describing two completely different events? Think about it. In chapter 1, humans are created male and female together after the animals. In chapter 2, the man is formed first. Then the animals are brought to him. And only then is the woman created from his rib. That's not just a different perspective. That's a different sequence entirely. And there's another detail that most people overlook. Right before God forms Adam in chapter 2, the text says something curious. There was no man to work the ground. Not there was no man. Period. But there was no man to work the ground. To till it. To cultivate it. This suggests that God formed Adam not because no humans existed, but because he needed someone for a specific purpose. Someone to tend a specific place. Someone to fulfill a particular role. The Hebrew word used here for work is fascinating. It's the word avid, which can mean to till or cultivate, but it also means to serve, to minister, to worship. It's the same word used later in the Bible to describe the work of priests in the temple. So Adam wasn't just created to be a gardener. He was created to be a priest, a mediator between heaven and earth, a steward of sacred space. This changes everything because if Adam was called to a specific role in a specific place, then the question becomes what was happening everywhere else. Who were the people living beyond the boundaries of Eden? And before you think I'm getting ahead of myself, consider this. The Bible itself hints at the existence of others outside the garden. Just a few chapters later, when Cain kills his brother Abel and is banished from God's presence, he says something that should make us all pause and think. Whoever finds me will kill me. Wait. Who exactly is he talking about? At this point in the traditional narrative, the only people alive should be Adam, Eve, and Cain himself. Abel is dead. So, who are these others that Cain fears? Who are these people who might hunt him down? And it gets even more mysterious. The text goes on to say that Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod. There he knew his wife and she conceived and bore a son. And then, get this, Cain built a city. A city. Why would you build a city if there were only a handful of people in the world? Who's going to live in this city? Who are these inhabitants that would make urban planning necessary? For centuries, theologians have tried to explain this away by suggesting that Adam and Eve had many other children not mentioned in the text. And Cain married one of his sisters. But think about how strange that explanation really is. Would an ancient audience just assume incest without any clarification? Wouldn't the narrator explain something so unusual? Or is it possible that the Bible is telling us something we've been missing? That there were indeed other people in the world? People who came from that broader creation described in Genesis 1. While Adam and Eve were the specific individuals chosen for a covenant relationship in Eden. This isn't a new idea. Jewish and Christian scholars have been exploring this possibility for centuries. The concept that Adam might not have been the first biological human, but rather the first spiritual representative of humanity. Think of it this way. Adam wasn't necessarily the first Homo sapiens. He was the first covenant partner. The first human being called into a sacred relationship with the divine. The first person given moral responsibility and spiritual authority. This interpretation actually makes the story more profound, not less, because it means that God didn't just create humanity and walk away. He chose to enter into intimate relationship with us. He selected representatives. He established covenants. He began a redemptive story that would eventually encompass all of humanity. But to understand this fully, we need to dig deeper into the language itself. Because sometimes the biggest revelations come not from what the text says in translation but from how it says it in the original Hebrew. The word Adam in Hebrew is fascinating. Can be a proper name. Adam, the individual man in Eden. But it can also be a common noun meaning human being or mankind. And it can be a collective noun referring to humanity as a whole. The confusion begins when we try to force one meaning onto a word that carries multiple layers of significance. In Genesis 1, when the text says God created Adam, it clearly means humanity in general, both male and female. There's no garden mentioned, no specific individual, no personal relationship. It's a sweeping statement about human dignity and purpose. But in Genesis chapter 2, Adam becomes personal, specific, individual. This is where we meet the man, not just mankind, the one formed from dust, placed in Eden, given a mission. So here's what emerges. Genesis 1 describes the creation of humanity as a species blessed with the divine image called to fill the earth and exercise dominion. Genesis chapter 2 zooms in on the appointment of one man, Adam, for a special purpose in a special place. This isn't contradiction. It's complementarity. Like the difference between saying humans landed on the moon and Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface. Both statements are true, but they're operating at different levels of detail and focus. And this understanding opens up a whole new way of reading the early chapters of Genesis. Instead of seeing them as a complete biological account of human origins, we begin to see them as a theological narrative about divine purpose and human calling. Adam becomes not just the first man, but the first man with a mission. Not the beginning of the human race, but the beginning of God's redemptive plan for the human race. But if this is true, if there were indeed other humans outside Eden while Adam was tending the garden, then we have to ask some serious questions about what was happening in the wider world. Were there civilizations, cultures, other ways of life developing parallel to the sacred drama unfolding in Eden? And more importantly, what does this mean for us today? How does it change our understanding of human nature, divine purpose, and our place in the cosmic story? These are the questions we'll be exploring as we continue this journey into forbidden history. Because the more we dig into these ancient texts, the more we realize that the story of humanity's beginning is far more complex, mysterious, and profound than we ever imagined. The truth is, we've only just scratched the surface. There are layers upon layers of meaning waiting to be uncovered, ancient interpretations that have been forgotten, archaeological discoveries that are reshaping our understanding of early human history, genetic research that's revealing new perspectives on human origins. But perhaps most importantly, there are theological implications that could transform how we see ourselves in our relationship with the divine. Because if Adam wasn't the first human being ever created, but rather the first human being called into covenant with God, then his story becomes even more significant. It becomes the story of divine election, of spiritual calling, of the beginning of a relationship between heaven and earth that would ultimately culminate in the coming of Christ. The early Christians understood this. The Apostle Paul called Jesus the last Adam, drawing a direct parallel between the first man in the garden and the God-man on the cross. Both were representatives of humanity. Both faced temptation. Both made choices that would affect the destiny of the human race. But where the first Adam failed, the last Adam succeeded. Where the first Adam brought death into the world, the last Adam brought life. Where the first Adam was formed from the dust of the earth, the last Adam rose from the grave to offer eternal life to all who would believe. This is why the story of Adam matters. Not because it gives us a complete scientific account of human evolution, but because it reveals the heart of God and the purpose of humanity. It shows us that we were made for relationship, called to stewardship, designed for communion with the divine. And it reminds us that even when we fail, Even when we fall, even when we hide in shame and fear, God comes looking for us, calling out, "Where are you?" Not because He doesn't know, but because He wants us to remember who we really are. As we continue this exploration in the next part of our series, we'll dive even deeper into the mysteries surrounding humanity's origins. We'll examine the archaeological evidence, explore the genetic research, and uncover the ancient interpretations that have been hidden for centuries. We'll discover how the story of the first Adam points forward to the last Adam, and how the Garden in Eden was always meant to be a preview of the kingdom of heaven. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can understand the full implications of Adam's unique role, we need to examine something that has puzzled biblical scholars for generations. Something that's been hiding in plain sight within the Hebrew text itself. You see, when we read Genesis in English, we lose some of the most crucial nuances that exist in the original language. And these nuances might hold the key to understanding not just who Adam was, but what was happening in the world around him. Let's go back to that moment right before Adam's creation. Genesis 2 verse 5. The text says there was no man to work the ground. But the Hebrew word used here isn't just any word for man. It's Adam. The same word that will become the name of the individual God is about to form. Now, this creates an interesting puzzle. If Adam doesn't exist yet, how can the text refer to him by name? Unless, of course, the word Adam here isn't referring to a specific individual at all. Unless it's referring to a type of human being, a category, a calling. The Hebrew language is rich with these kinds of word plays and double meanings. Adam comes from the root word Adama, which means ground or earth. So when God forms Adam from the Adma, there's a beautiful linguistic connection being made. The earth man from the earth. The one who belongs to the soil because he was shaped from it. But here's where it gets really interesting. Throughout the early chapters of Genesis, the text switches back and forth between using Adam as a proper name and using it as a common noun. Sometimes it's the Adam referring to the specific man in the garden. Sometimes it's just Adam referring to humanity in general. This fluidity suggests that the biblical authors understood something we often miss. That Adam was both an individual and a symbol. Both a historical figure and a representative. Both a person and a pattern. And this brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of the Adam narrative. The role he was called to fulfill in Eden wasn't just agricultural. It was priestly. Remember those two Hebrew words we mentioned earlier? Avid and shamar. To work and to keep. To serve and to guard. These aren't just gardening terms. They're temple terms. They're the same words used later in the Bible to describe the duties of priests in the tabernacle and temple. This means Eden wasn't just a garden. It was a sanctuary. A sacred space where heaven and earth intersected. And Adam wasn't just a gardener. He was a priest called to mediate between the divine and the earthly realms. Think about the imagery here. God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. The tree of life at its center. The rivers flowing out to water the whole earth. This isn't just a nice place to live. This is a cosmic temple with Adam as its first minister. And if Eden was a temple and Adam was its priest, then what does that make the rest of the world? What was happening beyond the boundaries of this sacred space? The text gives us some tantalizing hints. It describes Eden as being in the east. This implies direction, location, boundaries. It suggests that Eden was a specific place within a larger geographical context. Not the entire earth, but a particular region set apart for a particular purpose. And when Cain is banished from God's presence after killing Abel, where does he go? To the land of Nod, east of Eden. Again, this suggests geography, direction, other places beyond the sacred garden. But here's what's really fascinating. When Cain arrives in Nod, he doesn't find it empty. He finds a wife. He builds a city. He establishes a civilization. This doesn't sound like the actions of someone wandering alone in an unpopulated wilderness. This sounds like someone integrating into an existing community. Now, Traditional interpretations have tried to explain this by suggesting that Adam and Eve had many other children who aren't mentioned in the text, and that these children had spread out and established communities before Cain arrived. But think about the timeline here. According to the narrative, not much time has passed since the creation of Adam and Eve. Even if they had other children immediately, would there have been enough time for those children to grow up, spread out, establish cities, and develop cultures? Or is it possible that the Bible is hinting at something else entirely? That there were already people in the land of Nod when Cain arrived. People who had been there long before Adam was ever formed from the dust of Eden. This possibility becomes even more intriguing when we consider some of the other mysterious references scattered throughout the early chapters of Genesis. References that seem to point to a larger, more complex world than the simple Adam and Eve narrative would suggest. For instance, in Genesis 6, we encounter the strange story of the sons of God and the daughters of men. The text says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives from among them. Their offspring were called the Nephilim, described as mighty men of old, men of renown. Now, if humanity consisted only of the descendants of Adam and Eve, who exactly are these sons of God and daughters of men? Why the distinction? Why not just call them all children of Adam or descendants of the first couple? The Hebrew terminology here suggests two distinct groups, two different categories of beings. And this distinction implies a complexity to early human history that goes far beyond the simple narrative we're usually taught. But perhaps the most intriguing clue comes from an unexpected source: the genealogies themselves. When we trace the family lines in Genesis, we find something curious. The descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth, Adam's third son, seem to develop parallel civilizations. Both lines produce similar innovations: metallurgy, music, agriculture, livestock. It has as if two separate streams of human culture were flowing side by side, occasionally intersecting but fundamentally distinct. And here's the kicker. When we get to the genealogy of Seth's line, the text says something remarkable. In Genesis 5 verse 3, it states that Adam had a son in his own likeness, in his image, and named him Seth. Wait, in his own likeness, in his image. Why would the text need to specify this about Seth but not about Cain and Abel? Unless, of course, there was something different about Seth. Something that marked him as carrying on a particular lineage, a specific calling, a unique relationship with the divine. This language of likeness and image echoes the description of humanity's creation in Genesis 1. Remember, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. But now, we see this same language being used to describe the relationship between Adam and Seth specifically. Could it be that Seth was the one chosen to carry on the covenant line, the spiritual inheritance that had been entrusted to Adam? And if so, what does that tell us about the nature of Adam's calling and the complexity of early human history? These questions lead us to consider something that many people have never thought about: the possibility that the Bible isn't trying to give us a complete anthropological account of human origins, but rather a theological narrative about divine purpose and spiritual calling. In other words, Genesis might not be answering the question, how did humans evolve biologically? But rather, how did God begin his redemptive relationship with humanity? This shift in perspective changes everything, because if that's the case, then Adam's significance isn't biological, but spiritual. He's not important because he was the first Homo sapiens, but because he was the first human being called into covenant with God. This understanding actually aligns remarkably well with what modern science tells us about human origins. Genetic research suggests that humanity emerged from larger populations, not single pairs. Archaeological evidence points to complex, diverse early human societies. Anthropological studies reveal sophisticated cultures developing across different regions of the world. But none of this contradicts the biblical narrative if we understand Genesis to be telling a different kind of story. A story about God's election of particular individuals for particular purposes. A story about the beginning of salvation history, not natural history. And this brings us to one of the most profound implications of this entire discussion. If Adam was chosen for a covenant relationship, if he was called to be a priest in a sacred space, if he was meant to be a bridge between heaven and earth, then his failure wasn't just personal. It was cosmic. When Adam and Eve ate from the forbidden tree, they weren't just breaking a rule. They were shattering a relationship. They weren't just disobeying a command. They were abandoning their calling. They weren't just falling into sin. They were failing in their role as humanity's representatives before God. And this is why the Apostle Paul could write centuries later that sin entered the world through one man. Not because Adam was the only man alive, but because he was the covenant head of humanity, the appointed representative, the one through whom God had chosen to relate to the human race. This understanding makes Adam's story not smaller, but larger, not less significant, but more, because it means that from the very beginning, God was working out a plan of redemption, a plan that would ultimately culminate in another representative, another covenant head, another Adam, the last Adam, Jesus Christ. But before we explore that connection, we need to dig deeper into what happened after the fall. Because the story of humanity's rebellion in Eden is just the beginning of a much larger narrative. A narrative that stretches across centuries, cultures, and continents. A narrative that reveals the persistent human hunger for the sacred, even in the midst of our broken condition. And it's a narrative that might help us understand why even today in our modern scientific technological age, we still find ourselves haunted by questions of meaning, purpose, and transcendence. Questions that can't be answered by biology alone, but require us to grapple with the deeper mysteries of human existence. Because the truth is, we're still living in the aftermath of Eden. We're still dealing with the consequences of that first rebellion. We're still searching for the way back to the garden, back to the sacred, back to the relationship with the divine that was lost so long ago. And perhaps that's why these ancient stories still matter. Not because they give us scientific data about human evolution, but because they reveal something true about the human condition. Something that transcends time, culture, and scientific paradigm. We were made for more than mere survival. We were created for relationship, designed for purpose, called to something greater than ourselves. The story of Adam is ultimately the story of that calling. And the story of his failure is ultimately the story of our need for redemption. But redemption, as we'll discover, was always part of the plan. The implications of what we're uncovering here run deeper than most people realize. Because if Adam wasn't the first human being ever created, but rather the first human being called into covenant relationship with God, then we're looking at a completely different understanding of early human history. We're looking at a world that was already populated, already functioning, already developing cultures and civilizations while this sacred drama was unfolding in Eden. And that raises some fascinating questions. What were these other people like? How did they live? What did they believe? Were they aware of what was happening in that garden sanctuary to the east? The biblical text gives us tantalizing glimpses, but never the full picture. It's as if we're looking through a keyhole at a vast room, catching fragments of a much larger story. Consider the descendants of Cain after he's banished from God's presence. The text tells us that his lineage produces some remarkable innovations. Jabal becomes the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. Jubal becomes the father of all who play the harp and flute. Tubal-Cain forges all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. These aren't primitive cave dwellers. These are sophisticated people developing complex technologies, creating art, establishing trade networks. They're building the foundations of civilization itself. But here's what's interesting. The text presents these innovations almost matter-of-factly, as if such developments were natural, expected, part of the broader human story that was unfolding across the ancient world. This suggests that human creativity, ingenuity, and cultural development weren't limited to the descendants of Adam and Eve. They were part of the broader human experience, part of what it meant to be made in the image of God, regardless of whether you were inside or outside the covenant community. And this brings us to a crucial realization. The divine image wasn't exclusive to Adam's family line. According to Genesis 1, all of humanity was created in God's image. All people everywhere carried that spark of the divine. All were capable of creativity, relationship, moral reasoning, and spiritual awareness. Adam's uniqueness wasn't that he alone bore God's image. It was that he alone was called into direct covenant relationship. He was chosen to be a priest, a mediator, a bridge between the divine and human realms. This distinction becomes even more significant when we consider what happened after the fall. When Adam and Eve rebelled and were expelled from Eden, they didn't cease to be human. They didn't lose their dignity or their capacity for relationship with God. But they did lose their special status as covenant mediators. The sacred space was closed to them. The direct communion was broken. The priestly role was forfeited. But notice what the text doesn't say. It doesn't say that God abandoned humanity altogether. It doesn't say that the possibility of relationship was gone forever. Instead, it hints at a promise, a plan, a hope for restoration. Even in the midst of pronouncing judgment, God speaks of a future conflict between the serpent's offspring and the woman's offspring, one who would crush the serpent's head, even while being wounded in the process. This is the first whisper of redemption, the first hint that the story of Eden was not the end, but the beginning. Not a tragic conclusion, but a prologue to something greater. And throughout the generations that followed, we see this theme recurring. God calling individuals into covenant relationship. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, each one chosen not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to trust, willing to follow, willing to serve as representatives of humanity before the throne of heaven. The pattern established with Adam continued throughout history. God working through particular people for universal purposes, choosing the few to bless the many, establishing covenants with individuals that would ultimately benefit all of humanity. But there's something else we need to consider. Something that takes this discussion into even more mysterious territory. Throughout the ancient world, across different cultures and civilizations, we find remarkably similar stories. Accounts of a golden age, perfect beginning, a fall from paradise, a separation between heaven and earth. The Sumerians told of the Anunnaki, divine beings who came down from heaven to establish civilization on earth. The Greeks spoke of a golden age when gods and humans lived in harmony. The Egyptians described a time when the gods ruled directly over humanity. Hindu traditions tell of cycles of creation and destruction, of ages when divine beings walked among mortals. These aren't just random myths. They're echoes, memories, fragments of something that really happened, preserved in the collective consciousness of humanity and passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years. And what's fascinating is how these stories, despite coming from completely different cultures and time periods, share certain common elements. Perfect beginning, divine beings interacting with humans, a catastrophic fall or separation, the loss of direct access to the divine realm. Could it be that these stories are all remembering the same event? The same period in human history when heaven and earth intersected in ways that we can barely imagine today. The biblical account of Eden might not be unique because it's the only true story, but because it's the most complete and accurate preservation of a memory that was shared by all early humanity. Think about it. If Adam's role in Eden was truly cosmic in scope, if his priesthood was meant to mediate between heaven and earth for all of humanity, then his fall would have affected everyone everywhere. The separation between divine and human realms wouldn't have been limited to his family line. It would have been a universal catastrophe. And that might explain why cultures all over the world remember a time when things were different. when the gods were closer, when the divine realm was more accessible, when humanity lived in a kind of harmony that was later lost. The expulsion from Eden wasn't just Adam and Eve's personal tragedy. It was the moment when all of humanity lost direct access to the divine presence. When the cosmic temple was closed. When the bridge between heaven and earth was broken. But here's where the story takes another turn. Because if the fall had universal consequences, then redemption would need to be universal in scope as well. And that's exactly what we see unfolding throughout the rest of the biblical narrative. God's plan wasn't just to restore Adam's family line. It was to restore all of humanity to the relationship that was lost in Eden. This is why the promise given to Abraham was so significant. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Not just some families. Not just the covenant people. All families. All nations. All peoples. The plan of redemption was always meant to be as wide as the fall. As universal as the original creation. As inclusive as the divine image that was stamped on every human being from the very beginning. And this brings us to one of the most profound insights in all of Scripture. The idea that Jesus came not just as the Savior of Christians or even of the Jewish people, but as the second Adam. The last Adam. The one who would succeed where the first Adam failed. Paul makes this connection explicit in his letter to the Romans. Just as sin came into the world through one man and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. So through one man's obedience, righteousness would be made available to all. This isn't just about individual salvation. This is about cosmic restoration. The healing of the breach between heaven and earth. The reopening of the way into the divine presence. The restoration of humanity's priestly calling. Jesus didn't come just to forgive sins. Though he certainly did that. He came to restore the relationship. To rebuild the bridge. To reopen the temple. To make it possible for all of humanity to once again walk with God in the cool of the day. This is why the gospel writers are so careful to trace Jesus' genealogy back to Adam. This is why Paul calls him the last Adam. This is why the book of Revelation describes the New Jerusalem as a place where God will dwell with humanity forever. The story that began in Eden finds its completion in Christ. The cosmic temple that was closed is reopened. The priestly role that was forfeited is restored. The relationship that was broken is healed. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. This restoration isn't limited to those who were part of the original covenant community. It's offered to everyone. To all the peoples and nations and families of the earth. To the descendants of Cain as well as the descendants of Seth. To those who were always outside the garden as well as those whose ancestors once walked within it. Because the divine image was never limited to one family line. The capacity for relationship with God was always universal. What was needed was not the creation of something new, but the restoration of something that had been lost. And this is where the forbidden history we've been exploring becomes not just academically interesting, but personally transformative. Because it means that regardless of your background, your ancestry, your cultural heritage, you are part of this story. You carry the divine image. You were made for relationship with God. You have a calling that transcends your biological origins and connects you to the cosmic purpose that was established before the foundation of the world. The story of Adam isn't just ancient history. It's your story. His calling is your calling. His failure is your failure. But more importantly, his redemption is your redemption. Whether your ancestors were inside or outside the garden, whether they were part of the covenant community or among the nations, whether they remembered the old stories or forgot them entirely, you are invited into the same relationship that was offered to Adam in the beginning. You are called to be a priest, a mediator, a bridge between heaven and earth, not because of your genetic heritage, but because of your spiritual destiny. The garden may be lost, but the invitation remains. The temple may be closed, but access is being restored. The relationship may be broken, but healing is available. This is the ultimate meaning of the forbidden history we've been exploring. not just to satisfy our curiosity about the past, but to illuminate our purpose in the present, not just to understand where we came from, but to discover where we're going. Because the story that began with the first atom finds its completion in the last atom. And that completion is not just cosmic, but personal, not just universal, but intimate, not just historical, but eternal. The invitation that was first extended in Eden is still being offered today. The calling that was first given to Adam is still available to anyone who will receive it. The relationship that was lost in the garden is still being restored through the cross. And that perhaps more than any archaeological discovery or genetic analysis or linguistic insight is the most profound revelation of all. That this ancient story is not just about them, but about us. Not just about then, but about now. Not just about the beginning, but about the future that is still unfolding. The forbidden history of humanity's beginning turns out to be the authorized biography of humanity's destiny. And you, whoever you are, wherever you come from, whatever your story has been up to this point, are invited to be part of it. The question is not whether you qualify based on your ancestry or your heritage or your past. The question is whether you're willing to accept the calling. Whether you're ready to step into the role that was always meant to be yours. Whether you'll take your place in the cosmic story that began in a garden and will culminate in a city where God and humanity dwell together forever. But to truly grasp the magnitude of what we're dealing with, we need to venture into territory that will challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient civilizations. Because scattered across the globe, buried beneath layers of sand and time, lie archaeological discoveries that seem to echo the very stories we've been exploring. In the cradle of civilization where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers converge, archaeologists have uncovered something extraordinary. The ruins of Göbekli in Turkey dating back over 11,000 years. Massive stone pillars arranged in perfect circles carved with intricate reliefs of animals and symbols. This wasn't built by simple hunter-gatherers scratching out survival in caves. This was sophisticated architecture, complex engineering, sacred geometry. And here's what makes it even more remarkable. Göbekli was deliberately buried, not by natural erosion or the passage of time, but intentionally covered with tons of earth and stone, as if someone wanted to hide it, to erase it from memory, to ensure it would never be found. Why would an advanced civilization bury their greatest achievement? What were they trying to conceal? Or perhaps more importantly, what were they trying to preserve? The dating of these structures places them precisely in the time frame when many scholars believe agriculture was first developing. When humanity was supposedly making its transition from nomadic hunting to settled farming. But Göbekli suggests something far more complex was happening during this pivotal period in human history. These weren't the first tentative steps of primitive people learning to plant seeds. These were the sophisticated works of a civilization that already understood astronomy, engineering, and sacred architecture. A civilization that had both the knowledge and the social organization to undertake massive construction projects. And they're not alone. Across the ancient world, we find similar mysteries. The precision-cut stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia fitted together so perfectly that you can't slide a razor blade between them. The massive megalithic structures at Baalbek in Lebanon, some weighing over 800 tons, moved and positioned with techniques we still can't replicate today. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid stands as a testament to mathematical and engineering knowledge that seems to appear fully formed in the archaeological record. No trial and error. No gradual development. Just sudden sophisticated mastery of principles that wouldn't be rediscovered for thousands of years. These aren't just impressive buildings. They're evidence of lost knowledge, forgotten wisdom, capabilities that seem to exceed what we would expect from the civilizations that supposedly built them. And perhaps most intriguingly, many of these sites share common characteristics. Astronomical alignments, sacred geometry, symbolic representations that appear across cultures separated by vast distances and supposedly no contact. It's as if there was once a unified understanding of cosmic principles, a shared knowledge of how to build in harmony with celestial patterns, a common symbolic language that transcended geographical boundaries. Could these be remnants of the world that existed before the Great Separation? Evidence of the sophisticated civilizations that flourished when heaven and earth were more closely connected. Traces of the knowledge that was preserved by those who remembered the old ways. The Sumerian tablets speak of the Anunnaki, divine beings who came down from heaven to establish civilization on earth. They describe the teaching of arts and sciences, the introduction of agriculture and metallurgy, the founding of the first cities. These aren't presented as myths or legends, but as historical records, detailed accounts of real events involving real people in real places. The Sumerians even provide precise dates, lineages, and geographical locations. And what's fascinating is how closely these accounts align with the biblical narrative despite being written in a completely different cultural context. Both describe a time when divine beings interacted directly with humanity. Both speak of the establishment of civilization through divine instruction. Both hint at a catastrophic separation that changed the relationship between heaven and earth. The Sumerian king list records rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods before a great flood changed everything. The biblical genealogies describe patriarchs who lived for hundreds of years before lifespans dramatically shortened after Noah's time. These parallel accounts from independent sources suggest we're dealing with genuine historical memory. Not folklore or mythology, but the preserved recollection of actual events that were so significant they were remembered and recorded by every culture that experienced them. But here's where the story takes an even more mysterious turn. Because genetic research is now revealing patterns that seem to align with these ancient accounts in ways that should make us reconsider everything we thought we knew about human origins. Mitochondrial DNA studies trace all modern humans back to a common female ancestor dubbed Mitochondrial Eve, who lived in Africa somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago. Y chromosome analysis points to a common male ancestor. Y chromosomal Adam living roughly 60,000 to 300,000 years ago. But here's the key detail that often gets overlooked. These two figures didn't live at the same time. They weren't a couple. And they weren't necessarily the first humans to exist, but simply the most recent common ancestors along specific genetic lines. This suggests that human populations were diverse and complex from very early periods. Multiple lineages, various groups, different branches of the human family tree developing in parallel rather than descending from a single pair. And this aligns remarkably well with the picture we've been painting from the biblical text. Genesis 1 describing the creation of humanity in general. Genesis chapter 2 focusing on the specific calling of one individual within that broader population. Adam and Eve weren't necessarily the biological ancestors of all humanity. They were the covenant representatives, the chosen mediators, the appointed priests in the cosmic temple. Their significance wasn't genetic but spiritual. Their importance wasn't biological but theological. Their story wasn't about the origin of the human species, but about the beginning of God's redemptive relationship with humanity. This understanding suddenly makes sense of puzzles that have plagued biblical interpretation for centuries. Why Cain feared other people when supposedly only his family existed. Why he found a wife in the land of Nod. Why he built a city when the population should have been minimal. There were other people because humanity was already established across the earth. Adam's family wasn't the only game in town. They were the chosen representatives within a much larger human population. And this brings us to one of the most profound implications of everything we've been exploring. If Adam's role was representative rather than exclusive, if his calling was spiritual rather than merely biological, then his failure affected not just his direct descendants, but all of humanity. When the cosmic temple was closed, when the bridge between heaven and earth was broken, when the priestly mediation was lost, it created a spiritual crisis that impacted every human being everywhere. Not because they were all genetically related to Adam, but because they were all part of the human family that Adam represented. Think of it like this. If the president of a nation makes a decision that leads to war, it affects every citizen of that country, regardless of whether they voted for him or even knew he existed. His representative role means his actions have consequences that extend far beyond his personal circle. Adam's representative role meant his spiritual rebellion had cosmic consequences that affected the entire human race. The separation from divine presence, the loss of direct access to the sacred realm, the breaking of the communion that was meant to exist between heaven and earth. This is why cultures all over the world remember a golden age that was lost, a time when gods and humans lived in closer harmony, a paradise that was forfeited through some great calamity or rebellion. These aren't just wishful thinking or romantic nostalgia. They're the preserved memory of something that really happened. The breaking of a relationship that was meant to be universal. The closing of a door that was meant to remain open. The silencing of a conversation that was meant to continue forever. But if the fall was universal in its impact, then redemption needed to be universal in its scope. And this is where the story we've been tracing reaches its climactic revelation. The promise whispered in Eden about the offspring of the woman who would crush the serpent's head wasn't just about one individual. It was about the restoration of the cosmic order, the reopening of the heavenly temple, the rebuilding of the bridge between divine and human realms. And when Jesus came declaring himself to be the way, the truth, and the life, he wasn't just offering personal salvation. He was announcing the restoration of the cosmic priesthood, the return of the mediatorial role, the possibility for all of humanity to once again approach the divine presence. The genealogies that trace his lineage back to Adam aren't just about biological ancestry. They're about spiritual succession, the passing of the covenant calling from the first Adam to the last Adam. The completion of a role that was begun in Eden and fulfilled on Calvary. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The restoration offered through Christ isn't limited to those who were part of the original covenant community. It's extended to all the families of the earth, all the nations, all the peoples who carry the divine image, regardless of their ancestry or heritage. The Gentile inclusion that so amazed the early church wasn't an afterthought or a plan B. It was always part of the original design because the divine image was never limited to one family line. The calling to relationship with God was always meant to be universal. What happened in Eden affected everyone. What happened at Calvary is offered to everyone. The story that began with the first Adam finds its completion in the last Adam. And that completion encompasses all of humanity. This is why archaeological discoveries from around the world seem to point back to common origins. Why genetic research reveals shared ancestry. Why ancient texts from different cultures preserve similar memories. Why the human heart universally yearns for transcendence, meaning, and connection with the divine. We're all part of the same story. We all carry the same image. We all share the same calling. We all experience the same separation and we're all offered the same restoration. The forbidden history we've been exploring isn't just about ancient events in distant lands. It's about the cosmic drama in which every human being plays a role. The universal narrative that gives meaning to individual existence. The shared destiny that connects every person who has ever lived. Whether your ancestors were inside or outside the garden. Whether they remembered the old stories or forgot them entirely. Whether they were part of the covenant community or among the scattered nations. You are part of this story. You carry the divine image that was stamped on humanity from the beginning. You experience the separation that resulted from the cosmic rebellion. You feel the yearning for restoration that echoes through every human heart. And you are offered the possibility of return. Not to a geographical garden, but to a spiritual relationship. Not to a physical temple, but to the presence of the living God. Not to a lost paradise, but to an eternal kingdom where the original purpose of creation will finally be fulfilled. The story that began with Adam doesn't end with Adam. It continues through every generation and every culture among every people until the day when heaven and earth are fully reunited and the cosmic temple is restored forever. And in that great restoration, the forbidden history we've been exploring will finally be revealed in all its fullness. The mysteries that have puzzled scholars for centuries will be unveiled. The questions that have haunted human consciousness will be answered. But until that day, we're left with fragments, clues, echoes of a greater truth that transcends our current understanding, evidence that points beyond itself to realities we can barely imagine. The archaeological discoveries continue to accumulate. The genetic research reveals new patterns. The ancient texts yield fresh insights. And with each new revelation, the picture becomes more complex, more mysterious, and more wonderful. Because what we're discovering isn't just information about the past. We're uncovering truths about the present, about who we are, about why we're here, about where we're going. The forbidden history of humanity's beginning is still being written. And you right now in this moment are part of that ongoing story. Your choices matter. Your destiny is significant. Your role in the cosmic narrative has eternal consequences. The question isn't whether you qualify to be part of this story. You're already part of it simply by virtue of being human. The question is whether you'll embrace your role, whether you'll accept the calling, whether you'll step into the destiny that was prepared for you before the foundation of the world. The garden may be lost, but the invitation remains. The temple may be closed, but access is being restored. The separation may be real, but reconciliation is possible. The story that began in Eden continues today, and the ending is still being written. What we're about to uncover next will challenge not just your understanding of ancient history, but your entire worldview about the nature of existence itself. Because hidden within the Hebrew language are clues that most people never see. Linguistic fingerprints that point to truth so profound they've been overlooked for millennia. Let's go back to that crucial moment in Genesis 2 verse 5. The text says there was no man to work the ground. But in the original Hebrew, something extraordinary is happening with the language itself. The word translated as work is avid, and it carries layers of meaning that completely transform our understanding of what was really taking place. Avid doesn't just mean to till or cultivate in an agricultural sense. It's the same word used throughout the Hebrew Bible to describe worship, service to God, and priestly duties in the temple. When the Levites served in the tabernacle, they were doing avid. When the people worshipped God, they were performing avid. This wasn't farming. This was sacred service. And the second word shama, translated as keep or tend, is equally loaded with meaning. Means to guard, to protect, to watch over with vigilant care. Again, this is temple language. The priests were commanded to shamar the sanctuary, to guard it from defilement, and protect it from anything that might corrupt its holiness. So, when God places Adam in Eden to avid and shamar the garden, He's not appointing a groundskeeper. He's ordaining a priest. Eden wasn't just a beautiful garden. It was a cosmic temple, a sacred space where heaven and earth intersected, and Adam was its first minister. This transforms everything, because if Eden was a temple, then what was happening outside its boundaries takes on entirely new significance. Temples exist within larger contexts. They're set apart from the ordinary world precisely because they're sacred spaces where the divine presence dwells in unique ways. Think about the temple in Jerusalem. It was the most holy place in Israel. But Israel existed within a world full of other nations, other peoples, other cultures. The temple's significance wasn't diminished by the existence of Egypt or Babylon or Greece. If anything, its uniqueness was highlighted by the contrast. Similarly, Eden's role as a cosmic temple doesn't require that it be the only inhabited place on earth. In fact, its function as a mediatorial space between heaven and earth suggests that there were other realms, other peoples, other stories unfolding simultaneously. And this brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of the Hebrew text: the way the word Adam itself functions throughout these early chapters. In Hebrew, Adam can mean an individual person, but it can also mean mankind or humanity in general. The text moves fluidly between these meanings, sometimes referring to the specific man in the garden, sometimes to humanity as a whole. This linguistic flexibility suggests that the biblical authors understood something we often miss: that Adam was both particular and universal, both an individual and a representative, both a historical figure and a symbolic archetype. When Genesis chapter 1 describes God creating Adam in his image, male and female, it's clearly talking about humanity in general. When chapter 2 describes the formation of the atom from dust, it's focusing on a specific individual. But the connection between these two uses of the word suggests a deeper truth, that the individual Adam was chosen to represent the universal human condition. This is why Paul could later write about Adam as a type or pattern of the one to come. Adam's role wasn't just personal but representative. His actions didn't just affect his own destiny, but the destiny of all humanity. His calling wasn't just individual, but cosmic. And this representative function explains something that has puzzled interpreters for centuries. How could Adam's sin affect people who weren't even born yet? How could his disobedience have consequences for individuals who had no part in his decision? The answer lies in understanding the nature of representation itself. When a king makes a decision, it affects his entire kingdom. When a president declares war, it impacts every citizen. When a priest offers sacrifice, it mediates for the entire community. Representatives don't just act for themselves. They act on behalf of those they represent. Adam's representative role meant that his spiritual rebellion had consequences that extended far beyond his personal relationship with God. The cosmic temple was defiled. The bridge between heaven and earth was damaged. The mediatorial function was compromised. But here's where the Hebrew language reveals something even more remarkable. The word used to describe Adam's formation from dust is yatsar, which means to form or fashion like a potter shapes clay. It's an intimate artistic word that suggests careful craftsmanship and deliberate design. This same word is used later in the Bible to describe God's formation of the nation of Israel. Not their biological creation, but their spiritual formation as a people set apart for divine purposes. It's also used to describe the formation of prophets in the womb, individuals chosen before birth for specific callings. The pattern is consistent. Yatsar describes the deliberate formation of individuals or groups for special purposes within God's larger plan. It's not about biological origins, but about spiritual calling and divine election. This understanding casts Adam's formation in an entirely new light. He wasn't formed because no humans existed. He was formed because God needed someone for a specific role. Someone to serve as priest in the cosmic temple. Someone to mediate between the divine and human realms. Someone to represent humanity before the throne of heaven. And this brings us to one of the most profound revelations hidden within the Hebrew text: the location of Eden itself. The text says God planted a garden in Eden in the east. But the word Eden has a specific meaning that most translations obscure. Eden comes from a root word meaning delight or pleasure. But it also carries connotations of luxury, refinement, and abundance. It's not just a geographical location. It's a description of spiritual condition, a state of being characterized by perfect harmony between heaven and earth. When the text says God planted a garden in Eden, it's not just giving us a map coordinate. It's describing the spiritual reality of this sacred space, a place where divine delight could be experienced, where the pleasures of communion with God could be fully enjoyed, where the abundance of heaven could be tasted on earth. And when Adam and Eve were expelled from this garden, they weren't just losing a beautiful home. They were being cut off from the spiritual reality that Eden represented. The delight was lost. The pleasure was forfeited. The abundance was withdrawn. But notice what the text doesn't say. It doesn't say that Eden itself was destroyed. It says that access to it was blocked. Cherubim were placed at the entrance with flaming swords to guard the way to the tree of life. The spiritual reality remained, but the pathway was closed. This suggests that Eden continues to exist in some form, waiting for the day when access will be restored. when the cosmic temple will be reopened, when the bridge between heaven and earth will be rebuilt. And this is where the Hebrew language points us toward the ultimate resolution of the story. Because scattered throughout the Old Testament are promises of restoration that use the same terminology employed in the Eden narrative. The prophets speak of a time when God will again plant his people in their land, when he will form them for his glory, when they will serve and guard his sanctuary with perfect obedience, when the divine presence will dwell among them in the same intimate way it once did in the garden. These aren't just poetic metaphors. They're promises of literal restoration. The recreation of the identical conditions that were lost through Adam's rebellion. The reopening of the cosmic temple that was closed through human disobedience. But the prophets also hint at something even more remarkable. That this restoration won't be limited to one people or one place. That it will encompass all nations, all peoples, all the families of the earth. Isaiah speaks of a time when all nations will flow to the mountain of the Lord. When the earth will be full of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. When the wolf will lie down with the lamb and a little child will lead them. This isn't just political peace or social harmony. This is cosmic restoration. The return of the Adamic order on a global scale. The transformation of the entire earth into what Eden was meant to be. And at the center of this restoration stands a figure who embodies everything Adam was called to be but failed to achieve. One who would serve as the perfect priest in the cosmic temple. One who would mediate flawlessly between heaven and earth. One who would represent humanity without failure or rebellion. The Hebrew prophets describe this figure using language that deliberately echoes the Adam narrative. He would be a branch growing from the root of Jesse. He would be formed from the womb for divine service. He would delight in the fear of the Lord. He would restore the years that the locust had eaten and bring back the joy of Eden. But perhaps most significantly, he would succeed where Adam failed. Where the first man brought corruption into the cosmic temple. This coming one would cleanse it. Where Adam's disobedience closed the way to the tree of life. This figure's obedience would reopen it. Where the first representative of humanity fell. This ultimate representative would stand. The Hebrew text builds anticipation for this figure across centuries of prophetic literature. Not as a replacement for Adam, but as Adam's ultimate fulfillment. Not as a different kind of human being, but as the human being Adam was meant to be. And when this figure finally appeared when Jesus stepped onto the stage of history, the connections to the Adam narrative were unmistakable. His genealogy traced back to Adam himself. His temptation in the wilderness paralleled Adam's test in the garden. His obedience unto death reversed Adam's disobedience unto death. But most significantly, his role as mediator between God and humanity fulfilled the priestly calling that Adam had abandoned. Through his perfect life, sacrificial death, and victorious resurrection, he reopened the way into the cosmic temple. He restored access to the tree of life. He made it possible for humanity to once again walk with God in the cool of the day. The Hebrew language had been pointing toward this resolution all along. Every use of Avad and Shammah in the temple service. Every description of priestly mediation. Every promise of restoration and return. They were all preparing for the moment when the last Adam would complete what the first Adam had begun. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The restoration offered through Christ doesn't just apply to those who were part of the original covenant community. It extends to all who bear the divine image, regardless of their ancestry or heritage. Remember, the divine image was never limited to Adam's family line. Genesis 1 makes it clear that all of humanity was created in God's image. All people everywhere carry that spark of the divine. All are capable of the relationship that Eden represented. What was lost through Adam's rebellion wasn't the capacity for relationship with God, but access to the cosmic temple where that relationship could be fully realized. The way was blocked, not the destination. The door was closed, not the house. And what Christ accomplished wasn't the creation of something entirely new, but the restoration of something that had been lost. The reopening of the way. The removal of the barriers. the restoration of access to the presence of God. This is why the New Testament describes salvation not as escape from the world, but as the transformation of the world. Not as leaving earth for heaven, but as bringing heaven to earth. Not as the destruction of creation but as its liberation and renewal. The book of Revelation paints the ultimate picture of this restoration. A new heaven and a new earth where God dwells with humanity forever. A city that comes down from heaven to earth. Not a place where humans ascend to heaven. A reality where the cosmic temple encompasses everything and everyone who chooses to enter. In this vision, the tree of life grows in the midst of the city. Its leaves for the healing of the nations. The river of life flows from the throne of God through the streets where people dwell. There is no more separation between sacred and secular, between heaven and earth, between divine and human realms. This is what Eden was always meant to become. Not a private garden for a special couple, but a cosmic reality embracing all of creation. Not an exclusive sanctuary for the chosen few, but a universal temple where all who bear the divine image can worship and serve forever. The Hebrew language had been encoding this vision from the very beginning in the words Avid and Shamar. So in the fluid meaning of Adam, in the promises of restoration and return, in the hope of a coming one who would succeed where the first man failed. And this is why the forbidden history we've been exploring matters so much. Because it's not just about understanding the past. It's about recognizing the future that God has always been working toward. The destiny that was planned before the foundation of the world. The restoration that encompasses not just individuals but all of creation. Whether your ancestors were inside or outside the garden, whether they were part of the covenant community or among the scattered nations, whether they remembered the ancient stories or forgot them entirely, you are part of this cosmic narrative. You carry the divine image that qualifies you for relationship with God. You experience the separation that resulted from cosmic rebellion. You feel the longing for restoration that echoes through every human heart. And you are invited to enter the cosmic temple that has been reopened through the last Adam's perfect obedience. This invitation isn't based on your biological ancestry or cultural heritage. It's based on your spiritual identity as an image bearer of God. It's offered not because of who your parents were, but because of who you were created to be. The cosmic temple is open. The way of access has been cleared. The tree of life is once again available to all who will approach with faith and humility. The restoration that began in a garden will culminate in a city where God and humanity dwell together forever. But understanding this invitation requires recognizing something that might challenge everything you've been taught about human nature and divine purpose. Because the implications of what we've discovered go far beyond religious doctrine or theological theory. They touch the very core of what it means to be human in a universe that was designed for relationship, purpose, and eternal significance. The archaeological evidence continues to accumulate, pointing towards sophisticated ancient civilizations that seem to understand cosmic principles we're only beginning to rediscover. The genetic research reveals patterns of human diversity that align remarkably with the biblical picture of multiple populations existing from early periods. The linguistic analysis uncovers layers of meaning that transform our understanding of the ancient texts. But perhaps most significantly, the existential questions that haunt every human heart find their answers in this cosmic narrative. Why do we feel homesick for a place we've never been? Why do we yearn for meaning beyond mere survival? Why do we sense that we were made for something greater than what this world currently offers? Because we carry the memory of Eden in our spiritual DNA. We remember, however dimly, what relationship with the divine was meant to be like. We long for the restoration of the cosmic order that was lost so long ago. We hunger for the return to the garden that remains our true home. This isn't wishful thinking or religious fantasy. This is the deepest truth about human existence. We are exiles from Eden, but we are also heirs of restoration. We are fallen image bearers, but we are also candidates for redemption. We are broken representatives of humanity, but we are also invited participants in the cosmic renewal that is already underway. The story that began with the first Adam continues with every choice we make, every relationship we build, every act of service we perform. We are still writing the chapters of this cosmic narrative. We are still working out the implications of the restoration that was accomplished on Calvary. And one day when the story reaches its climactic conclusion, when the new heaven and new earth are fully revealed, when the cosmic temple encompasses all of redeemed creation, the forbidden history we've been exploring will be seen in all its fullness. The mysteries that have puzzled us will be unveiled. The questions that have haunted us will be answered. The longings that have driven us will be satisfied. And we will understand perhaps for the first time what it really means to be human in a universe that was designed for eternal relationship with the divine. Until that day, we live between Eden and the New Jerusalem, between the garden that was lost and the city that is coming, between the first Adam's failure and the last Adam's triumph, between the cosmic rebellion that brought separation and the cosmic restoration that promises eternal communion. We live in the tension of the already and the not yet. Already redeemed but not yet fully transformed. Already invited into the cosmic temple, but not yet seeing it in its fullness. Already participants in the restoration but not yet experiencing its completion. But we live with hope, with purpose, with the knowledge that our individual stories are part of a much larger narrative that spans from creation to consummation. With the confidence that the same God who walked with Adam in the garden is still walking with us today, leading us home to the relationship we were always meant to enjoy. The forbidden history of humanity's beginning is also the authorized biography of humanity's destiny. And in that destiny, every question finds its answer. Every longing finds its fulfillment. And every heart finds its home. But as we continue to unravel these mysteries, we encounter something that will shake you to your core. Because hidden within the ancient texts are references to beings that don't quite fit our neat categories of human and divine. Entities that walked between worlds, bridging realms in ways that our modern minds struggle to comprehend. The book of Genesis introduces us to the Nephilim, described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. These weren't ordinary humans. The text calls them mighty men of old, men of renown, warriors whose very existence seemed to blur the boundaries between heaven and earth. Now, if humanity consisted only of Adam's descendants, who exactly were these sons of God? And why does the text distinguish them from the daughters of men? This isn't just poetic language or mythological embellishment. This is a historical record pointing to something extraordinary happening in the ancient world. The Hebrew term Ben Elohim typically refers to divine beings, members of God's heavenly council. These weren't humans who had achieved some elevated spiritual status. These were entities from the divine realm who somehow crossed into the physical world and began interacting with humanity in unprecedented ways. Think about the implications. If divine beings were taking human wives and producing offspring, then the ancient world was far more complex than we've been taught. The boundary between spiritual and physical realms was more permeable. The interaction between different orders of existence was more common. And this wasn't happening in isolation. Cultures across the globe preserved memories of divine beings descending from heaven to interact with humanity. The Sumerian tablets speak of the Anunnaki described as those who came down from heaven to earth. Greek mythology tells of the titans and gods who mingled with mortals. Hindu traditions describe avatars and divine incarnations. These parallel accounts from independent cultures suggest we're dealing with genuine historical phenomena, not just shared fantasy. Something was happening in the ancient world that every civilization experienced and remembered, even if they described it in different cultural terms. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The arrival of these divine beings wasn't entirely benevolent. The biblical text suggests their presence led to unprecedented corruption. Violence filled the earth. The thoughts of human hearts became continually evil. The very fabric of creation seemed to be unraveling. This is why God determined to cleanse the earth through flood. Not because humanity had committed ordinary sins, but because the cosmic order itself had been perverted. The boundaries between realms had been violated. The natural progression of human development had been hijacked by forces that introduced knowledge and capabilities humanity wasn't ready to handle. Noah's preservation wasn't just about saving good people from bad people. It was about preserving a pure human lineage from genetic and spiritual corruption. The text specifically describes Noah as perfect in his generations, using language that suggests genetic integrity rather than just moral character. The flood wasn't merely divine punishment for human wickedness. It was cosmic reset, a return to the original design before supernatural interference corrupted the natural order. But the flood didn't eliminate the memory of what had happened. It didn't erase the knowledge that had been introduced. It didn't completely remove the influence of those who had descended from the divine realm. This is why we find traces of advanced knowledge scattered throughout ancient civilizations. Mathematical principles that wouldn't be rediscovered for millennia. Astronomical calculations of stunning precision. Engineering capabilities that seem to exceed what Bronze Age cultures should have possessed. The megalithic structures we discussed earlier weren't just impressive architecture. They were evidence of knowledge that had been preserved from before the flood. Techniques and understanding that had been passed down through the generations even after the original teachers were gone. Consider the precision of the Great Pyramid's construction. Its alignment with true north accurate to within 3/60ths of a degree. Its mathematical relationships encoding the value of pi and the golden ratio. Its internal chambers designed according to acoustic principles we're only beginning to understand. This wasn't achieved through trial and error or gradual development. This was the application of sophisticated knowledge that appeared fully formed in the archaeological record. Knowledge that seems to have been inherited rather than invented. And it's not just in Egypt. The stone circles of Göbekli demonstrate understanding of complex geometry and astronomical cycles. The massive stones of Baalbek show mastery of engineering principles that challenge our assumptions about ancient capabilities. The precision-cut blocks of Pumapunku reveal knowledge of metallurgy and stonework that seems anachronistic for their supposed time period. These aren't anomalies or accidents. They're evidence of a lost golden age when knowledge flowed more freely between realms, when divine beings shared understanding that transformed human civilization in profound ways. But with that knowledge came corruption. The same forces that enabled incredible achievements also introduced perversions that threatened the very essence of humanity. Power without wisdom. Knowledge without moral restraint. Capability without spiritual maturity. This is the pattern we see repeated throughout history. Every leap forward in human knowledge brings both blessing and curse. Every technological advance creates new possibilities for both creation and destruction. Every expansion of capability raises questions about how that power should be used. The atomic age gave us both clean energy and nuclear weapons. The digital revolution brought us global communication and unprecedented surveillance. Genetic engineering promises both healing and the potential for new forms of corruption. We're still living with the consequences of that first introduction of forbidden knowledge. Still struggling with the same fundamental questions about the proper relationship between divine wisdom and human ambition. Still trying to figure out how to handle capabilities that exceed our moral development. And this brings us to one of the most sobering realizations of our entire exploration. The story of humanity's beginning isn't just ancient history. It's a template that keeps repeating. A pattern that echoes through every generation and every civilization. The temptation to grasp divine knowledge apart from divine relationship. The desire to become like gods without submitting to God. The willingness to cross boundaries that were established for our protection. These aren't just ancient problems. They're the defining struggles of human existence in every age. This is why the story of Eden remains so relevant. Not because it gives us scientific data about human evolution, but because it reveals the spiritual dynamics that continue to shape human history. The same choices that confronted Adam continue to confront us. The same temptations that led to the first rebellion continue to lead to rebellion today. The serpent's question in the garden echoes through every generation. Has God really said? The doubt about divine authority. The suggestion that we can determine good and evil for ourselves. The promise that disobedience will make us like gods. Every technological breakthrough, every scientific discovery, every expansion of human capability comes with the same fundamental choice. Will we use this knowledge in submission to divine wisdom, or will we assert our autonomy and determine our own course? The ancient world faced this choice when divine beings offered forbidden knowledge. Our world faces the same choice as we stand on the brink of artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation, and capabilities that previous generations could only imagine. The pattern is consistent across time and culture. Power corrupts when it's divorced from wisdom. Knowledge destroys when it's separated from love. Capability becomes catastrophic when it's disconnected from moral restraint. But there's another pattern that runs through history as well. The pattern of redemption. The promise that corruption can be cleansed, knowledge can be redeemed, and power can be restored to its proper purpose. This is why the story of the last Adam is so crucial. Jesus didn't just reverse the first Adam's disobedience. He demonstrated what humanity looks like when divine knowledge is perfectly united with divine love. When ultimate power is exercised in complete submission to the Father's will. When infinite capability is channeled through perfect wisdom. The miracles weren't just displays of supernatural power. They were previews of what creation looks like when the cosmic order is functioning as intended. Healing instead of sickness. Abundance instead of scarcity. Life instead of death. Order instead of chaos. The resurrection wasn't just victory over death. It was the beginning of cosmic restoration. The first fruits of a new creation where the corruption introduced by forbidden knowledge would be completely healed. Where the boundaries violated by rebellious beings would be perfectly restored. But this restoration isn't just future hope. It's present reality for those who choose to align themselves with the last Adam's perfect obedience. Who submit their knowledge to divine wisdom. Who exercise their capabilities in service of divine love. Who use their power to heal rather than harm. This is the invitation that emerges from our exploration of forbidden history. Not to remain ignorant of the past, but to learn from it. Not to fear knowledge, but to pursue it in the right relationship. Not to reject power, but to exercise it according to divine design. The cosmic temple that was corrupted in Eden is being restored through the cross. The knowledge that was perverted by rebellion is being redeemed through submission. The power that was misused for destruction is being reclaimed for creation. But this restoration requires recognizing that we're still living in the aftermath of that ancient corruption. Still dealing with the consequences of forbidden knowledge. Still struggling with the proper use of capabilities that exceed our wisdom. The archaeological evidence continues to reveal traces of lost civilizations that achieved remarkable things before falling into corruption and collapse. The genetic research shows the complexity of human origins, while confirming our fundamental unity as image-bearers of God. The ancient texts preserve memories of both the glory and the tragedy of humanity's relationship with the divine realm. All of this points to the same conclusion. We are more than we appear to be. We carry within us the potential for both incredible achievement and devastating corruption. We have access to knowledge and power that can either elevate or destroy us depending on how we choose to use them. The forbidden history of humanity's beginning reveals that we've always been caught between two destinies. The destiny of the first Adam leading to corruption and death, and the destiny of the last Adam leading to restoration and life. Every choice we make aligns us with one pattern or the other. Every decision about how to use our knowledge and power moves us either toward the corruption of Eden or the restoration of the New Jerusalem. The cosmic drama that began in a garden continues in our hearts. Our homes. Our communities. Our nations. The same forces that once walked the earth in physical form continue to influence human affairs through the choices we make and the allegiances we choose. But we're not left to figure this out on our own. The same divine wisdom that was available to Adam in the garden is available to us through the spirit of the last Adam. The same relationship that was broken through rebellion can be restored through faith. The same calling that was forfeited through disobedience can be reclaimed through submission. The forbidden history we've been exploring isn't just about them. It's about us. Not just about then. It's about now. Not just about the beginning. It's about the future that's still being written. And in that future, every mystery will be unveiled. Every question will be answered. Every corruption will be healed. Every tear will be wiped away. The cosmic temple will encompass all of creation. And we will finally understand what it means to be human in a universe designed for eternal relationship with the divine. Until that day, we live between the memory of Eden and the promise of the New Jerusalem, between the corruption of the first Adam and the restoration of the last Adam, between the forbidden knowledge that led to death and the redeemed wisdom that leads to life. We live as image-bearers of God in a world that's being renewed, as stewards of knowledge and power that can either heal or harm, as participants in a cosmic story that began before time and will continue into eternity. The choice that confronted our first parents continues to confront us. The same serpent still whispers the same lies. The same tree of the knowledge of good and evil still offers its forbidden fruit. But we also have access to the tree of life. We can choose the path of submission over autonomy. We can embrace the restoration that's been offered rather than the corruption that comes naturally. We can align ourselves with the cosmic order that's being renewed rather than the cosmic rebellion that's being judged. This is the ultimate meaning of the forbidden history we've been exploring. Not just to understand where we came from, but to choose where we're going. Not just to know the past, but to shape the future. Not just to be informed about cosmic events, but to participate in cosmic restoration. The story that began with the first Adam finds its completion in the last Adam. The temple that was corrupted in Eden is being restored through the cross. The relationship that was broken through rebellion is being healed through faith. And we, wherever we've come from, whatever our ancestry, however our story has unfolded to this point, are invited to be part of that restoration, to take our place in the cosmic temple, to exercise our calling as image-bearers of God, to participate in the healing of creation itself. The forbidden history of humanity's beginning is also the authorized biography of humanity's destiny. And that destiny includes everyone who chooses to embrace it. Everyone who recognizes their need for restoration. Everyone who submits to the wisdom of the last Adam, rather than the corruption of the first. The invitation stands open. The way has been prepared. The cosmic temple awaits. The question that remains is not whether we qualify, but whether we'll respond. Whether we'll choose the path of restoration over the path of corruption. Whether we'll align ourselves with the cosmic order that's being renewed rather than the cosmic rebellion that's being judged. Because in the end, this isn't just history. This is destiny. This is the story we're all part of, whether we realize it or not. The story that began in a garden and will culminate in a city where God and humanity dwell together forever. The forbidden history has been revealed. The hidden truth has been uncovered. The cosmic narrative has been unveiled. Now the choice is ours. Now the future is being written. Now the story continues with whatever we decide to do next. The questions we've been exploring throughout this journey aren't just academic curiosities. They strike at the very heart of what it means to be human. Because if the story we've uncovered is true, if Adam wasn't the first biological human, but rather the first spiritual representative of humanity, then everything changes. Your identity isn't determined by your genetic ancestry, but by your spiritual calling. Your significance doesn't come from being descended from the first man, but from being invited into the same relationship he was offered. Your purpose isn't limited by your biological origins, but expanded by your divine potential. Think about what this means for how you see yourself. You're not just a random collection of atoms that happen to achieve consciousness. You're not just the product of blind evolutionary forces operating without purpose or direction. You're an image-bearer of the divine, created with intention, called to relationship, designed for eternity. The longing you feel for something beyond this material world isn't wishful thinking. It's spiritual memory. The sense that you were made for more than mere survival isn't delusion. It's divine calling. The hunger for meaning that transcends biological existence isn't fantasy. It's the echo of Eden resonating through your soul. But this understanding also comes with responsibility. Because if you carry the divine image, if you're called to the same priestly role that Adam was given, if you're invited into the cosmic temple that spans all creation, then your choices matter in ways you might never have imagined. Every decision you make either moves you toward the restoration of Eden or deeper into the corruption that followed the fall. Every relationship you build either reflects the divine love that created you or the brokenness that separated humanity from its source. Every word you speak either participates in the ongoing creation of reality or contributes to its continued destruction. This isn't about earning salvation through good works. This is about recognizing that salvation has implications that extend far beyond personal forgiveness. When you align yourself with the last Adam's perfect obedience, you become part of the cosmic restoration that's already underway. You join the great work of healing that will one day encompass all of creation. The archaeological discoveries we've discussed aren't just interesting footnotes to ancient history. They're evidence that humanity has always been capable of more than we sometimes imagine. The genetic research isn't just scientific data about human origins. It reveals the complexity and diversity that's always characterized our species. The ancient texts aren't just religious documents from primitive cultures. They preserve memories of realities that modern minds struggle to comprehend. The linguistic analysis isn't just academic exercise. It unveils layers of meaning that transform our understanding of existence itself. All of this evidence points to the same conclusion. We live in a universe far more mysterious and meaningful than materialistic worldviews would suggest. We participate in a cosmic story that began before time and will continue beyond the boundaries of space. We carry within ourselves the potential for both incredible corruption and amazing restoration. The forbidden history we've explored reveals that the boundary between the natural and supernatural has always been more permeable than we've been taught. The interaction between different orders of existence has always been more common than we've been led to believe. The influence of spiritual realities on physical events has always been more significant than we've been encouraged to consider. This doesn't diminish the importance of scientific inquiry or rational investigation. It expands the scope of reality beyond what purely materialistic approaches can encompass. It invites us to consider dimensions of existence that transcend the merely physical without abandoning intellectual rigor or empirical observation. Because the God who created the physical universe also established the laws that govern it. The divine intelligence that designed the genetic code also structured the mathematical principles that describe cosmic behavior. The same wisdom that formed Adam from dust also ordained the processes by which elements are forged in stellar furnaces. Science and faith aren't enemies in this understanding. They're complementary approaches to comprehending different aspects of a unified reality. One explores how things work. The other investigates why they exist at all. One maps the mechanisms of creation. The other seeks the mind behind them. The tensions that sometimes arise between scientific and religious perspectives often stem from category mistakes. Trying to use scientific methods to answer theological questions. Attempting to derive scientific conclusions from religious texts. Expecting empirical observation to provide ultimate meaning. Or demanding that spiritual truths conform to materialistic assumptions. But when each approach operates within its proper domain, they can illuminate different facets of the same cosmic story. The story of a universe that operates according to discoverable laws, but also serves purposes that transcend mere mechanical function. The story of creatures who emerge through natural processes, but also carry supernatural significance. This is why the question of Adam's role matters so much. Not because it threatens scientific understanding of human evolution, but because it reveals dimensions of human existence that science alone cannot address. Questions of meaning, purpose, moral responsibility, spiritual destiny, relationship with the divine. These aren't scientific questions, but they're real questions. They arise from genuine aspects of human experience that demand answers, even if those answers can't be measured in laboratories or calculated through equations. The image of God stamped on every human soul isn't something you can detect through genetic analysis. The calling to relationship with the divine isn't visible under microscopes. The responsibility to serve as stewards of creation isn't encoded in DNA sequences. But these realities shape human behavior in ways that are observable, measurable, significant. They explain why humans create art, why we seek justice, why we sacrifice for others, why we yearn for transcendence, why we feel guilty when we do wrong, why we hope for redemption. The forbidden history we've uncovered doesn't contradict scientific discoveries about human origins. It provides a framework for understanding why those origins matter, why the emergence of consciousness was significant, why the development of moral reasoning was crucial, why the capacity for spiritual awareness was transformative. Adam's story isn't competing with evolutionary biology for explanatory territory. It's addressing questions that evolutionary biology can't answer. Not how humans develop the capacity for relationship with God, but why that capacity exists at all. Not what biological processes led to moral consciousness, but what moral consciousness means for human destiny. This understanding liberates both science and faith to pursue their proper purposes without unnecessary conflict. Science can investigate the mechanisms of creation without being burdened with providing ultimate meaning. Faith can address questions of purpose and destiny without being constrained by empirical methodologies. But it also reveals why both approaches are necessary for complete understanding. Because we are both physical and spiritual beings. We exist in time but are made for eternity. We function according to natural laws, but are called to supernatural purposes. The cosmic temple that Adam was appointed to serve encompasses both dimensions of reality. The priestly calling he was given involves both caring for creation and mediating between realms. The relationship he was offered included both physical fellowship and spiritual communion. When that relationship was broken, both dimensions suffered. The physical world was subjected to futility, corruption, decay. The spiritual realm became inaccessible to ordinary human experience. The bridge between heaven and earth was damaged, though not destroyed. The restoration offered through Christ addresses both aspects of the damage: physical healing and spiritual reconciliation, material renewal and relational restoration, the redemption of creation and the regeneration of creatures. This is why the New Testament speaks of salvation in such comprehensive terms. Not just forgiveness of sins, but transformation of nature. Not just individual redemption, but cosmic renewal. Not just spiritual benefits, but physical resurrection. Not just escape from this world, but the recreation of this world according to divine intention. The forbidden history we've explored reveals that this comprehensive restoration was always the plan. From the beginning, God intended for heaven and earth to be united, not separated. For spiritual and physical realms to be integrated, not isolated. For divine and human natures to be in harmony, not conflict. Adam's calling was to facilitate that integration as a priest in the cosmic temple. His failure created separation that affected all dimensions of existence. Christ's success restores the possibility of integration for all who choose to participate. But this restoration isn't automatic or inevitable. It requires response, decision, participation. The cosmic temple is being rebuilt. But each person must choose whether to enter. The bridge between heaven and earth is being repaired. But each individual must decide whether to cross. The invitation extends to everyone because everyone carries the divine image. Everyone has the capacity for relationship with God. Everyone can participate in the cosmic restoration that's underway. But the invitation must be accepted. The calling must be embraced. The relationship must be chosen. This is where the forbidden history we've explored becomes intensely personal. Because it's not just about ancient events in distant times. It's about the choice that confronts every human being in every generation. The choice between the corruption of the first Adam and the restoration of the last Adam. Between autonomy and submission. Between self-determination and divine guidance. Between temporal purposes and eternal significance. Between the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. The same serpent that whispered lies in Eden continues to whisper lies today. The same promise of becoming like gods apart from God continues to tempt every human heart. The same choice between divine wisdom and human pride continues to shape individual destinies and collective futures. But the same grace that sought Adam and Eve after their rebellion continues to seek every human soul today. The same love that refused to abandon humanity, despite their failure, continues to pursue relationship. Despite our resistance, the same hope that was whispered in the first promise of redemption continues to be offered through the last Adam's perfect sacrifice. The cosmic story that began in a garden will culminate in a city where God and humanity dwell together forever. Where the cosmic temple encompasses all of creation. Where the tree of life grows beside the river of life for the healing of the nations. Where the knowledge that was forbidden becomes wisdom freely shared. Where the power that was corrupted becomes strength perfectly exercised. Until that day, we live between the times. Between the fall and the restoration. Between the corruption and the healing. Between the separation and the reunion. We live as exiles from Eden, but as citizens of the New Jerusalem, as fallen image-bearers, but as redeemed sons and daughters, as broken representatives of humanity, but as restored priests in the cosmic temple. The forbidden history has been revealed. The hidden truth has been uncovered. The cosmic narrative has been unveiled. The invitation has been extended. The choice has been clarified. The way has been prepared. What remains is your response, your decision, your participation in the story that's still being written, your choice between the destiny of the first Adam and the destiny of the last Adam, your answer to the question that echoes through every human heart. Will you enter the cosmic temple that's being restored? Will you accept the calling that was first offered in Eden? Will you take your place in the story that began before time and will continue into eternity? The forbidden history of humanity's beginning has become the authorized invitation to humanity's future. And that future is still being written. By you. By your choices. By your response to the love that has been pursuing you since before you were born. The cosmic temple awaits. The tree of life beckons. The river of life flows. The invitation stands. The question remains. What will you choose?